All right, so today we're diving deep into group dynamics.
Oh, this is going to be good.
It is, right? It's something we all experience
Every day.
pretty much, but we're focusing on how men and women specifically, well, how their behavior changes when they're part of a group.
Yeah, like are there guy group rules and girl group rules? Yeah.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're looking at a website called stoic.new. They analyze all kinds of interesting social stuff.
And they use AI for some of it, which I think is really cool.
Super cool. So, listeners, if you've ever wondered why you act differently around your buddies versus, say, your coworkers.
Or how come your sister is different when she's with her book club compared to when she's with, like, her college friends?
That's what we're going to unpack. Why these groups matter and how the rules change depending on who's in them, especially for men versus women.
And the thing is, everyone kind of notices this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, guys acting all tough in a group.
Oh, yeah. Classic boys being boys.
But Stoic.new, they dug deeper. And they're saying that even if a guy's putting on that tough guy front, he might be struggling underneath.
Like secretly lonely or something?
Could be. They say men avoid showing vulnerability because they worry about looking weak, especially to other guys.
Which, ironically, could lead to bigger problems down the line.
Exactly. It's like, are you really part of a supportive group if you can't even admit when you're not okay?
Makes you think, huh? So is this tough guy thing just how men are, like, hardwired, or is society telling them to act that way?
Well, Stoic.new, they say it's kind of both.
Both. How so?
So like way back when, caveman days,
Okay, going way back.
men had to be strong, right? Protect the tribe, hunt, all that.
Makes sense.
And that expectation to be the strong, silent type, it got passed down over generations, they say.
So even though we don't need to fight off saber-toothed tigers anymore?
Thankfully.
Yeah.
But the expectation to be that guy, it's still there, even if it's not what men really need anymore.
So it's like they're playing a part, almost.
Kinda, yeah. And sometimes I think guys get so used to the role, it's hard to tell what they're really feeling.
Interesting. Now, Stoic.new also talked about women and how their groups work differently.
Oh yeah, totally different vibe there.
They said women tend to focus on connection and sharing feelings.
Which, on the surface, sounds pretty great.
Right, like supportive, emotional, all that.
But Stoic.new, they point out that even with all that closeness, there can be a downside.
There's always a catch.
Right. So imagine you have this super tight group of women, everyone's sharing everything.
Sound idyllic.
But then what about someone who doesn't quite fit in? Or maybe they disagree with the group.
Oh, I see where this is going.
It can get tricky because instead of like open conflict, there might be subtle exclusion.
Like leaving someone out of the conversation.
Could be. Or gossip starts flying behind their back.
So it's less about yelling and more like a silent power struggle.
Yeah, that could be way more stressful because you don't even know where you stand.
So much for all that female bonding.
Well, the bonding is real, but Stoic.new makes it clear there's this whole other layer of complexity going on.
Fascinating stuff, but why is it so different? Like guys yelling versus girls being all subtle. Is it like nature versus nurture again?
Probably a bit of both, to be honest. Some scientists think it goes way back,
Yeah.
evolution-wise.
Okay, back to the cave people again.
Well, think about it. For women, back then, their survival depended on cooperation, raising kids together, forming strong bonds.
Now it takes a village, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why communication for women is more about keeping the peace, keeping everyone connected.
Interesting. But we're not in caves anymore, so clearly society plays a role too, right?
Huge role. How we raise boys and girls, what the media shows us, all that shapes how we're supposed to act.
So it's like we inherit these ancient instincts, but then society tweaks them, even if those tweaks aren't helpful anymore.
That's the challenge, figuring out which parts are outdated and how to make groups work better for everyone.
Totally agree. So we've got these two different patterns emerging, but how do they actually play out in real life? Give me some examples.
Well, let's take conflict, right? Say a group of guys get into a heated argument.
Yelling, maybe some table pounding.
Maybe, but often, once it's over, they're good. No hard feelings.
Like they let off steam and move on.
Exactly. But with women, it might be different.
I'm guessing it's not just yelling and then it's over.
Not always.
Yeah.
Women might avoid the big blow-up, but then the conflict simmers under the surface.
Oh, that silent treatment thing.
Could be that, or passive-aggressive comments, or the gossip mill starts churning.
Sounds like a conflict goes underground.
In a way, yeah. And Stoic.new, they're saying this difference comes down to communication styles.
How so?
Well, men, they're often more direct, even confrontational. They want to state their opinion, make their point.
Which makes sense if you think about that whole competing for status thing we talked about.
Right. But women, they're more likely to focus on keeping the relationship smooth, even if it means not saying exactly what they think.
So one's about winning the argument, the other's about preserving the connection.
And that can lead to misunderstandings, hurt feelings, all sorts of messy stuff.
So we've got different communication styles, different ways of handling conflict, plus all these expectations from society about how we should act.
It's a recipe for, well, some interesting group dynamics, that's for sure.
No kidding. But the good news is we can learn to recognize these patterns and maybe even change them, right?
That's what we're going to talk about in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait. This is already getting me thinking differently about all the groups I'm part of.
Me too. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Totally agree. All right, listeners, stay tuned for part 2, where we get into the really exciting stuff, how to actually create better, more inclusive group dynamics.
It's going to be good.
So how do we actually make these groups better? Like, is there a magic formula to make everyone feel included?
Well, if there is, I haven't found it yet.
Yeah, fair enough.
But Stoki.nu, they talk about creating spaces where people can just be themselves, like truly authentic.
Okay, I like that idea, but how do we actually do that?
Well, for men, it could start with just listening to each other better.
Okay, listening. That's always good advice.
But really listening, Yeah. Not trying to jump in and fix everything.
So instead of man up, it's more like, tell me more.
Exactly. Just acknowledging that someone's struggling, that can make a huge difference.
So it's about creating that safe space to be vulnerable.
Exactly. And for women, it might be about challenging those subtle ways we sometimes exclude each other.
Like the silent treatment, the gossip, all that.
Yeah. If you see someone being left out, try to include them.
Or if you hear someone gossiping, maybe gently steer the conversation in a different direction.
It's about building each other up, not tearing each other down.
I love that. But what about when you're in a group that's like already set in its ways?
Yeah, this could be tough.
Like, how do you change the rules without everyone freaking out?
Well, it's not about forcing change on anyone.
Right, that never works.
It's more about opening up the space for different ways of being.
So more options, more freedom to express yourself.
Exactly. But it takes time and patience, and those conversations could be a little awkward at first.
Totally. But I think it's worth it in the long run, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
When everyone feels like they can truly belong, the whole group benefits.
So did Stokic.nu give any real-world examples of how this works?
Oh yeah, tons. One thing they talked about was having more women in leadership roles.
That makes sense. If you only see men in charge, it reinforces all those old ideas about who's supposed to be in control.
Right. And they also talked about mentoring programs, especially in fields where there aren't a lot of women.
So it's about supporting each other, not just competing.
And men have a big role to play here too.
So?
It's about challenging those old school ideas about masculinity being allies to women.
Instead of seeing women's success as a threat.
Exactly. It's about realizing that when everyone has a chance to shine, everyone wins.
I love that. But I think some people might hear all this and feel overwhelmed, like, where do I even start?
Yeah, it can feel like a big task.
So what's one small thing someone could do to make a difference?
Well, have you ever noticed how often men interrupt women in meetings?
Oh, all the time.
So next time you see that happening, maybe gently call it out.
Like, hey, I think she wasn't finished.
Exactly. Or if you hear someone making a sexist joke, even if it seems harmless,
Don't just laugh along.
try it. Maybe say something like, I don't think that's funny.
It's about setting a different tone.
And it can be uncomfortable at first, but those little actions, they add up.
It's like we're all writing this script together, and we can choose to make it better.
I love that analogy. It's about being mindful, being intentional.
And not being afraid to speak up.
Exactly. So, listeners, think about the groups you're in.
Your family, your friends, your coworkers.
Take a moment to observe the dynamics. Who's talking, who's not?
Is everyone being heard?
And if not, how could you help change that?
This has been so insightful. It's like I've always sensed these things, but now I have a way to think about them.
Me too.
And
It's like a whole new way of seeing the world.
Totally. All right, listeners, we're going to take a quick break, but stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive where we explore what a truly inclusive group dynamic might feel like.
It's going to be good.
Okay, so we've talked about how these group dynamics, like, they can get kind of messy, especially with all these expectations on men and women.
But the thing is, even though these patterns are like ingrained, they don't have to be our destiny.
Yeah, it's not like we're stuck with them forever, right?
Exactly. Stokeit.nu, they're big on that point. We can rewrite the script, so to speak.
Create new roles, new ways of being in groups.
And honestly, I bet you've been thinking about your own life as we've been talking.
Oh, for sure. Work, family, friends. It's like you start seeing these dynamics everywhere.
Once you see it, you can't unsee it, right?
Totally. But what do we do with that awareness? Like, how do we actually change things?
Well, Stokes.new, they say the first step is to just pay attention
Pay attention to what?
to how things are playing out in your groups. Who's always talking? Who never gets a word in?
Who's getting interrupted? All that.
Exactly. And then think about why. Are those patterns helpful? Are they making the group better?
Or are they just, like, perpetuating those old, outdated ways of doing things?
It's not about blaming anyone. It's about understanding the dynamics so we can shift them.
So, listeners, next time you're hanging out with friends or at a work meeting,
Take a minute to observe. Who's holding the floor? Who's being overlooked?
yeah, and don't just observe, like, do something.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Maybe you invite someone to share their thoughts.
Or you back up someone whose idea got shot down.
Those little things, they can make a difference.
It's about sending a signal that you value everyone's voice.
And that you're not afraid to challenge the status quo.
This is so inspiring. It's like we have the power to create these awesome, inclusive groups.
We really do. It starts with each of us, making those small changes, one interaction at a time.
And over time, those little ripples can turn into a wave of change.
Totally. It's like we can rewrite the script for how men and women relate to each other in groups.
And create something way more fulfilling for everyone.
I love that.
Well, this has been such a fantastic deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on groups and how they work.
Me too. It's been really eye-opening.
Listeners, we hope you feel the same. Think about what you've learned today and how you can apply it to your own life.
Challenge those old patterns. Create spaces where everyone can shine.
And remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about making those small changes that add up over time.
You got this.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep those group dynamics glasses on.